How's it going, guys? I'm Jeff.
I'm Alyssa.
And welcome to the Real Life Podcast. Today we have a special treat for you. One of our favorite people from afar. You guys know we love using the interview series on this podcast for people that we enjoy online personally. As, I don't want to use the word consumer because I don't like that word, but as partakers of the internet, there are people that we really enjoy and are inspired by that aren't in our community and we don't live with us, but we have a relationship to in some sorts. And our guest today is one of those people. So today we have the Sensei Ninja Bible teacher, John
My
Mark
favorite Bible
Comer.
pastor.
Exactly. How's it going?
It's going great, especially since I just found out I'm a ninja.
I know, right? Well, Sensei and Ninja, you put those together. I'm like, that's essentially, I feel like, how you interpret and teach the Bible. So I want to let you intro yourself, but I want to give my interpretation first. So John Mark Comer, we've probably known each other. I don't even know if I've told you this. I've known of you since before we were friends. Yeah, I was 19, following the Lord for maybe 6 months to a year, going to a tiny little school in an enormous town called Forest Grove, Oregon. If you don't know, if you guys are listening, inside joke that I think there's about 5 people that live there and there's more cows than people. And I was attending, one of my buddies said, hey, you should come to this thing called The Way on Friday nights where this guy teaches the Bible really in an awesome way. And it's kind of like college students, young adults. So I was like a decade ago at this point. Do you remember those days?
Yeah, and that would have been at least a decade ago. Yeah, if not longer.
So that was my
Amazing.
first
Back when you were just Jeff, before you were Jefferson Beck.
I know, right? Isn't it hilarious how that's actually the joke?
With the podcast, when you were just Jeff, the college kid.
I know, college student, 19, playing baseball in Forest Grove, Oregon. It is funny. That's how we actually know sometimes if people actually know me, in like a relational way, or if it's just, they've just seen my stuff online because they usually will call me Jefferson, but I like it. Sounds more regal. I'll receive it. Okay, so now, but what would you say though? So now up until that point, catch me up. What do you do now? I mean, I obviously know, but for people listening, how would you kind of say in a couple sentences what you do, what you enjoy doing, what kind of takes up most of your vocational work, and maybe a minute or two on like your family team?
Yeah, I live right in the city in Portland, Oregon, and I pastor a church there, and I kind of spend most of my time and emphasis on teaching, and I write books and stuff and do a little bit of that, but really my heart is around teaching, and I really want to help people discover how to follow Jesus, not just what it means to follow Jesus or what the Bible says, but how to actually do it. So that's kind of what I'm about.
That's awesome. And if you don't listen to his sermons and his teachings online, you don't know where to find them, Bridgetown Church on podcast. Incredible sermons. Our small group's actually been going through the Identity and Calling series that you guys did last year, I think.
Oh, really cool.
Right? So it's been really blessing our little tribe and our little community. And we got a couple rapid fire questions for you to start off before we get into some really good stuff we're excited to chat about. But the first thing I want to say, which is hilarious, there's like a running joke in our family where like me and again, I'm hoping one of these days we actually can hang out a little bit more. Whenever I'm in Portland, you're gone. Whenever you're in Hawaii, where it's a different island, et cetera. We're always close, but no cigar. But from afar, I can definitely tell that I feel like me and you very much have had a similar journey theologically, but also walking with the Lord. And then also it seems to me we very much are similarly wired and read the same stuff and very much drawn to and inspired by a lot of the same authors. And so what's funny is I think because of that, a lot of our outputs can be really similar. But what's hilarious is I think it was maybe a year ago, we're sitting in this is just the first of this happening like 20 times in
our small group.
Yeah. You have an amazing book called Garden City. Everyone needs to read that. It's self-explanatory if you know that imagery of scripture of basically Genesis to Revelation, work, vocation, rest, etc. Beautiful and amazing. You have a chapter in there in Sabbath. And our group got talking about, and I have a book called It's Not What You Think, which is very similar. It's kind of about trying to get a little bit more, trying to push the Jewish context back into the scriptures, understand the worldview that Jesus was in, and especially also in the Old Testament as well. And we were all in the group talking about like Sabbath, and everyone was like, because we're big Sabbath proponents. We've been doing it and honoring the Sabbath for a couple years now. Hugely life-giving practice. And so I wrote about it like 4 years ago now at that point in that book, or 3 years ago. And so everyone got talking about it and kind of asked us some questions and stuff like this. And then Alyssa was like, oh, you guys know what you need to do? Like,
I just go, John Mark has a really good chapter.
Yeah, John Mark has this book called Garden City, and he has a chapter in there on the Sabbath, and it's phenomenal. And I was like, I nudged her and I was like, it is phenomenal. But I was like, you do know your husband has a chapter on the Sabbath, right? In a book of his as well.
My God.
So it was kind of hilarious.
Which I forgot, because I don't know if you and Tammy are like this, but when Jeff's writing a book, when he's writing a book, he's processing it with me the whole time.
Yes.
And so when it actually like comes out, I don't actually read the book because I feel like I pick it up and I'm like, oh, I've heard this 5 times.
Yeah.
I forgot that he had a chapter on Sabbath.
Yeah. And so that's happened a few times.
Isn't that one of the best things about living in community?
I was just going to say, no one cares.
when you have any kind of you're in front of people kind of ministry, it's so like everybody has to be somewhere where you're just shoulder to shoulder. And you're nobody cool or nobody special.
Totally. And there's a weird thing where like it's weird for them to sometimes read my stuff. Like I get it. You know what I mean? Like we're just friends and this is our community and this is our thing. So it is funny because like no one, I kind of almost try to keep my stuff away from the community a little, and they support it and they love it. But it's funny that how that's happened. And I agree. I think I think some of the best, especially if you have any online presence, which some people who here on the podcast listen to that do. I think you need to be in a place where they don't act like it doesn't exist, but they don't really care. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the perfect blend.
I think they really cheer you on, but they don't put you on a pedestal.
In the same way,
and they don't try to humble you either.
Exactly, in the same way that they would for the landscaping company guy and for the guy who owns a videographer business. And it's like, so we support you, we love you, we're in your corner. How can we serve? But it's not. They don't care. And we found that it's really special and awesome. So, okay, rapid fire. Are you guys ready? There's only a couple of them. First one is, it's usually what's your Starbucks drink because we interview a lot of basic white girls, but I know with you, it is not a Starbucks drink. So what is your go-to?
I would say water or something.
Exactly. So what, even though I will say it, because I'm on the same page with you with coffee.
What's your coffee drink and coffee shop of choice?
Yes, which I have a couple in Portland that I am interested to hear what you say. But yeah, what's your go-to coffee? You a oat milk latte guy, black coffee?
Would be just black coffee made in a Chemex.
Yes.
And my favorite coffee in Portland would be Heart with a close follow-up by Kova.
Oh, dude. Okay. So Dom actually just took me, like, I feel like I've done all the coffee in Oregon and all the coffee in Portland. I'd never done Heart. And there, dude, I just had it last weekend. Phenomenal.
Yeah. It's phenomenal. My favorite.
And I'm a barista guy too. And yeah, Kova's amazing. So, okay. Next one. And I know you're on this jam is, what is your Enneagram number? And I actually already know because we, you talk about it, but so maybe tell people your number and then maybe give us a minute on the most thing that it's been helpful for or what you've enjoyed about it.
Yeah, well, first off, we have to preface that by saying, Jeff, that in traditional Enneagram theory, before it became popularized,
I know, I'm not allowed to type people.
Years ago, you're actually not allowed to ask that question. And if you're asked, you're not allowed to answer that question.
Yep.
Because Enneagram was designed as a tool for personal and spiritual growth. And if you know somebody else's number, it's really easy to label them 100%. And then judge them because Enneagram exposes like the deepest, darkest secrets of your ugly motivations.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm really trying to do as a type 1, so the cat's out of the bag, it's public knowledge, but who sees the world with very perfectionistic, judgmental, critical thinking eyes and can tell you everything that's right and everything that's wrong about a person or a situation or a church or an idea, is I'm really trying to refrain from judging people's motivations and rather just stick to the behavior. Because I think so often I read intention into somebody's behavior and it's like I assume I have the power of mind control or something. I don't have the power of mind control. And I really want to like recondition my mind to believe the best about somebody's motivations and just deal with their behavior in the sense of if I have to call somebody out or judge a behavior, I'd rather just judge a behavior than somebody's intention, especially since sometimes all of us do bad things for decent reasons. We make bad decisions at times with good motivation. That said, I am an Enneagram type 1, which is the perfectionist or the reformer, depending on how it's labeled. My driving need in life is to be perfect or really to be good. I see almost everything through a moral lens, whether it's like a theological interpretation of the way of Jesus or what kind of coffee or the color of paint on my walls. Everything feels like a moral issue to me.
Yeah.
And the reason Enneagram has been so helpful is because for two reasons. One, I think one of the most important things in our apprenticeship to Jesus, especially as we start to age a little bit into our 20s and 30s and beyond, is dealing with what, Jung called your shadow side. And a number of spiritual formation writers have started to use that language. One of the Enneagram lines is the best thing about you is also the worst thing about you. And so, for example, my perfectionism means that I'm motivated, and my attention to morality means that I'm motivated by duty, which is actually a really good thing. So if you want to tell me, what I need to start or stop doing, all you need to tell me is what's right and what's wrong. That's enough of a motivation for me. So I have a lot of close friends that are type 7s. For them, like the root need is to like escape pain and have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically. and others it has to be relational. So I don't need like that carrot in the sense of something doesn't have to be fun to drive me or relational to drive me or make me look good to drive me. That's not because I'm more virtuous. That's just not the way I'm wired. I'm very much driven. So there's this good part of me, but the downside to that is because I see everything through moral eyes and because I have such high standards and because I have, like my therapist calls it, X-ray vision, like I just see everything that's right and that's wrong. The downside of that is I can also be, I'm the quintessential older brother in the prodigal story of the prodigal sons. And I can be, and that's kind of Christian language, but I can be very judgmental. I can be very like self-righteous. I can be holier than thou. I can be condescending toward people. I can constantly be criticizing and harping on people. These are like when I'm in the flesh and I'm immature and I'm tired and I'm unhealthy and it's been a long week and I'm just not my best self. So Enneagram has been so helpful because it exposes your shadow side and it helps me see the shadow in a sense to the light, like the backside weakness to my front side strength. And that has been so helpful because our shadow sides tend to do more damage in our interpersonal relationships and life than anything else, because often they're in the dark. We don't see them, we don't acknowledge them, we don't do the hard work of self-awareness and dealing and coming to understand how other people experience us, which is usually very different than how we experience ourselves. Yeah. And so it's so helpful for that. And the second thing I love about it is Enneagram gives me hope because unlike Myers-Briggs or others that are more static personality tests about how you see the world, Enneagram will show you this is an immature, unhealthy, fleshly, in the language of the New Testament, version of your personality. And here is a mature, healthy, Christ-like image. Yes. Here's what Christ would look like if you were to grow and mature into the best version of yourself. And here's some of the journey that you have to go on. And that, for me, has just been worth its weight in gold.
100%.
So
yeah,
good.
we absolutely love it. It's been helpful to us in our marriage personally. And I agree with what you said. And I think this is actually even outside of the Enneagram, just as a truth of life. I think one of the things that seems so self-evident, really, if you just spend 2 seconds on it, but that we don't wrestle with enough is the fact that like whatever you're wired like, most likely your gift is your curse. That there very much is like a double-edged sword to you. And it seems just so obvious even in scripture, right? Like you got Paul, enormous zeal that clearly, allowed him to, and deeply passionate and deeply disciplined that clearly allowed him to not make the best choices in regards to how he treated Jesus followers before he became one. And then once he did, clearly he put that into practice. Me as an 8 or even a couple other, wirings that I would particularly have, very easily want to define myself against everything else, which I think is a gift in the sense of I'm very able to never, ever submit to groupthink, like unless I actually deeply think it should be done.
Yeah.
But doing that
can be like a rock in the middle of a river.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
But doing that at default, it's like, well, sometimes the group's right, and sometimes that's actually where people need to go and where our people are going. And I think passion is coupled with that. So David seems similar to that of like passion was his blessing, passion was his curse.
Yep.
But yeah.
And not just the blessing and curse, but really the potential. Like you as an 8, I mean, you can look out and say, all right, either I can become Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Donald Trump, both of which are strong 8s.
Yeah, the list of 8s is a very huge spectrum.
Yes, I as a 1 can look out and Lenin, slaughtered hundreds of millions of people, was a 1, and so was the Apostle Paul.
That's crazy. Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah.
So it's so helpful for me to have like this is what a mature, healthy, Christ-like version of your personality can look like as you year over decade over life mitigate against your shadow side
100%.
And just continue to, as the old school reformers would say, mortify your sin.
I know, don't you love good old John Owens? And so like, John Owen.
I don't actually
just crucify.
But I like that word.
Totally. I agree.
We need to bring it back, man. What happened to mortification? Like
I know. That's the hard part about I think the loss of I think fundamentalism is we're actually losing a lot of. Well, you even talked about that with even I think your recent series. Like we're losing some very good things we need to lose, but with that we're also losing a lot of the very like strong language that actually is very helpful for sure. Yeah. So what do you have anything on that? Do you want to go to the next rapid fire question?
Well, I do, but I don't want to stay here, so we can.
Okay. Last rapid fire question. Then we're going to spend our bulk of your time on what you've been journeying and writing about lately, which I'm excited to get into. So last rapid fire question, which is a fun personality revealer. What was your go-to 90s jam? If you could pick 1 or 2 songs, you feel like, man, that's the one I remember. That's the one I think about when I go back to my 90s days. What would that have put you at? Like
were
high
you
school?
In your 20s?
High school? Yeah, college?
19?
Yeah, so I'm born in 80. So 90s was 10 to 20. So I graduated 98.
Can you think of a song or two that was like your go-to then?
Yeah, I think late 90s was still my like favorite era for music so far in my lifetime. So I'm gonna embarrass myself here, but Third Eye Blind from
Dude,
like
I could see, you got a little indie vibes to you with like the little kind of like it's not emo, but it's like it's that rock, that good rock. Like there was a couple of bands like that were killer then.
Kind of back in the day, they were kind of like the crossover. I was really into indie rock like all through high school. If anybody heard of the band, I stopped listening to it, kind of thing. And then later in high school, I kind of came back around and got a little bit into more mainstream. And they were like the perfect blend of like pop and indie back in the day.
That's true. So did you wear the really tight jeans?
Even back then, before they were cool?
No, that was before tight jeans. That was in the punk scene.
Yeah, I feel like our high school was tight jeans.
Right. Okay,
yeah.
Got into the punk scene as much. I was in the like
skateboarding ripped jeans.
You wore everything from like Goodwill and Value Village. So I wore all this like 70s polyester, but then with like Birkenstocks and hemp necklaces and long hair.
Oh man, dude, you were kind of Portland before Portland.
You get 10% off if you wore polyester, and I mean just like had like bad fake leather jackets from my poor parents. I drove a Volkswagen van. I just played an indie rock Telecaster all the time.
That's amazing. Yeah, I feel like you were doing Portland before Portland was doing Portland, you know?
Yeah, well, Portland wasn't as cool as it is now. Back in the day,
I'm saying,
that's true.
It'd be weird.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's spend most of our time and the rest of our time on what it seems like. I think you just turned in your book, I think, and the topic of that, and kind of maybe if you're anything like me during a writing season or when you turn one in, that definitely is kind of at least for me, it's something like that's what I've been journeying through the last year or two, and so it definitely feels like it's been on my mind. It's fresh. It's almost funny. I don't know if you agree with this, but when the book finally comes out, I also feel like I'm past that at that point. Like I'm onto something else, but that's just how long the process takes. So tell me about it. So it's on hurry, and I'd love to hear maybe you just give kind of like the pain point there or the need there of why your maybe personal journey or why you think that book should be written. Because I'm just really intrigued by that because a cousin version of that I've been thinking about is I feel like I've noticed in Christianity, we're getting very good. Even people that are in solid camps, streams, etc., we're very good at the, not just proper belief, but just kind of like what would Jesus' behavior or answer have been to a question, you know? And we're getting very good at, I think, knowing that. But I feel like I'm starting to realize, man, we really don't spend any time on actually kind of his cadence. Like, how did he just kind of feel throughout the day? How did he kind of operate? How did he kind of spend his days and his weeks and his years? Because I think that's deeply important, but I don't know if that's related. But yeah, where'd this topic come from? Why are you kind of sitting on it and writing about it right now? And what would you say the pain point is there?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's hard to even know how I got to it. I got through my own autobiography of kind of emotional burnout. I was the pastor of a mega church and just kind of had an emotional crisis and just, got to my early 30s and just realized, man, this is not the person that I want to be. This is not the father, the husband that I want to be. And so 4 or 5 years ago, I guess 4.5 years ago, I resigned and went on a sabbatical and, or maybe not resigned, demoted myself kind of, went on a sabbatical and have spent the last 4 or 5 years just deep dive in therapy and Sabbath and the spiritual disciplines and spiritual formation and spiritual direction and Enneagram work and shadow side and like just learning psychology. Like all this stuff has been basically the last half decade of my life. And it's been life-changing, but the hardest thing of all of it has been this idea of hurry. And that's the other intersection because I think no matter what your story is, everybody recognizes that culture has sped up to this insane, crazy, fast pace. And with the digital age, with the phone, what infinity in our front right pocket has done to most of us. I live in a city, so there's urbanization, and then you have 3 kids, and no matter where you live, you can live in like rural Eastern Oregon, and if you have 3 kids, your life is busy,
Yeah, activities,
so
sports,
just
etc.
the refrain of busyness, and then what the digital age has done just to amp that up to 11. And then just experiencing as a pastor, really wanting to lead people into life with Jesus and a life of transformation and realizing what are the obstacles. And some of them are the obstacles that you would expect: money, sexuality. We're in this crazy progressive, hyper secular city where people think we're crazy to believe what we believe, all the political stuff, all the anger right now. There's some of the stuff that you would expect me to say, but the number one thing I've come to realize that's keeping people from life with Jesus, from transformation, from health, from growth and maturity, is honestly, I think, busyness and hurry. I honestly think that's at the top. People are just too busy and in too much of a rush to actually experience the life that Jesus has on offer, and then out of that to become the kind of person that Jesus has for them to become. And so I think, like, when you talk about hurry, you kind of talk about the tip of the spear. So the whole book was born out of, I've been hanging with this older, wiser pastor down in California by the name of John Ortberg. And have you read any of his stuff, Jeff?
Yeah, I think Ortberg is one of my favorite, actually, in regards to, like, I know you're a big Willard fan, but, and it's not that Willard's too deep for me, because he's like, well, I mean, of course he's a legend and he is deeper than me, but there's like, I just can't get on his cadence, you know what I mean? And so I almost love Ortberg better, because he's like a Willard disciple in the sense of interpretation.
Yes.
And so, all that to say, Soul Keeping, or that's what it is? Yeah, some other ones. I love Ortberg.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And his new one, by the way, is insane. It's called, I think it's called Eternity is Now in Session, and it's excellent.
Oh, that's a cool phrase.
Anyway, so John Ortberg is this, 60-year-old pastor down in Menlo Park who was mentored by Dallas Willard for 25 years or something up until his death, and was at Dallas's funeral and the whole thing, and essentially is popularizing a lot of Dallas's ideas.
Yeah.
And so I've been hanging with them a little bit lately, and he's not like my mentor or anything because he's way out of my league. So I just have been asking, like, can I get lunch with you? Give me 1 hour. I'll buy you lunch. I'll come with a journal, 10 questions. I'll make it worth your time. And he keeps saying yes. And now we've done it. I don't know how many times. We have another one on the docket in a couple of weeks. And that's cool. My secret agenda is, like, he's going to wake up about a year in and realize, dang it, I'm mentoring this kid who has no business. He's not worthy of me. Yeah. Anyway, so I've just had some wonderful, he's just a brilliant, incredible Jesus-y dude. And we've been talking a lot about this idea of hurry. And he tells a story about back in the late 90s was when he was on staff, Ortberg was on staff at Willow Creek in Chicago, which is interesting because they're in the news right now for some pretty nefarious reasons. And he was just getting sucked into kind of just the speed and insanity and stress of the megachurch world. Not that it's all bad, it's a part of it. And so he calls up his mentor, this philosopher, Dallas Willard, out in Southern California, and says, all right, what do I do? What am I missing? And the way he tells the story, there's this long silence on the other end of the line, because apparently Willard, there was just always a long silence. He was notorious for being really slow and really smart and really loving. Those are kind of like three of the things you hear a lot about him. And there's this long silence, and then Willard says, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. And then, Ortberg writes that down, and that's incredible. What else is there? Another long pause. And then Willard says, there is nothing else. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry. And the first time that John told me that story, I think it resonated deeply with just my own journey. But it also really struck me as odd because that's just not what I would have expected. I live in one of the most progressive secular cities in America, and face all kinds of challenges in my own life with Jesus, much less the church that I pastor or I'm one of the pastors at. And I think if you had asked me a couple of years ago, what's the greatest challenge you face? I don't know what I would have said, but I guarantee you hurry would not have even been a contender for top 10.
Yeah.
But the more I'm at it, the more I get into the world of spiritual formation, the more I just follow Jesus, the more I realize, man, that is the crux issue. We're just in too much of a rush and too much of a hurry to experience life. If you think about just the triumvirate that Jesus in the Gospel of John and Paul and pretty much all of his writings just harp on love and joy and peace. Hurry is basically the main obstacle between all three. Hurry is incompatible with love. Like, you guys are parents, you're lovers, you get this. Like, hurried people are not loving people.
And the minute hurry, the kids start freaking out. They don't feel loved. Anytime you try to push a kid with hurry, they just break. They
just stop. They go the other direction. Honestly, most of my worst moments as a dad, as a husband, as a pastor, as a neighbor are almost always when I'm in a hurry, when I'm in a rush, when I normally lose my temper and yell at my kids or say something I massively regret. It's almost always because they're late, or we have this thing, we scheduled too many things to do, or we didn't get a Sabbath, or whatever it is. Almost always, probably 90% of the time. So hurry is incompatible with love. It's incompatible with joy. Jesus and all the Master Jesus people down, the real Sensei Jesus people down through 2 millennia now of church history, not to mention all of the positive psychologists and secular mindfulness experts and Buddhist happiness gurus. Everybody's all saying the same thing. Happiness or joy is essentially about focus on the moment, on the here and the now, and just being full of delight and gratitude. And this is what Jesus has been saying since the Sermon on the Mount. So I honestly think when I'm in a rush, when I'm in a hurry, it's really hard for me to drink deeply at the well of celebration and live a grateful life. And then, of course, peace. None of us are ever in a hurry and just feeling deep shalom,
Yeah.
And there's so much anxiety right now, and the news feed and the way that everything is, just the anxiety's ramped up so high. And I so badly want to be a non-anxious presence, So all that to say, I think hurry is just right at the axis point of so much of the intersections between spirituality, emotional health, maturity, family, relationships, marriage, parenting, cultural needs. I think it's right at the intersection.
Yeah.
That's so good. As I'm just thinking, what do you think is making us hurry? Because we're I feel like we don't even live in a city. We don't go to work. We work from home, and yet I can still feel the hurry in we're probably the least likely to be hurry people, and yet I still feel the spirit of hurry. So what do you think is feeding that? And then what would you say, obviously this is all in your book, but what would you say then is a few things that you'd recommend to combat hurry?
Yeah.
Or the spirit of hurry?
No, that's awesome. Yeah. There's a spirit of hurry, and then there's also just your body is in a hurry. You know what I mean? And there are ways sometimes you got to do things fast where you can keep a calm spirit. But yeah, I think, again, I'm not a sociologist, so that's not my area of expertise, but all the reading and research I've done around it has pointed to a couple of different, if it's a murder mystery and who killed off a slower life, there's a couple of strong contenders. One is for sure money. Ironically, we don't realize that in America how we talk a lot about the middle class disappearing, but what we forget is that the middle class is only 50 to 70 years old. And so a lot of it has to do with more wealth equals more options. So if you were living 100 years ago and you're a poor farmer and you don't really even use cash and you do most of your life through trading, there's not a lot to hurry you, if that makes sense. So much of hurry has to do with you have money, which means you have options. I want to go out to brunch, I want to do this, and I want to see a movie, and I want to catch up on entertainment, I want to play on my phone, and there's just too much to do. So money and affluence has definitely created people that have too many options, and the more options you have, the more anxiety you have. So there's been all sorts of really solid scientific research that basically ironically points to the promise of America and capitalism is we'll give you endless options, but it actually decreases your happiness because it gives you decision fatigue and choice anxiety and FOMO and all of that stuff. So money is one factor. Technology is a huge factor. Of course, 2007, the release of the iPhone is the greatest thing ever, but it goes back for at least 150 years. In the 1960s, of all the labor-saving devices, for everything from a toaster to a microwave to a dishwasher to, all of this stuff. And you have the automobile, which sped things up. You have the freeway. You have the clock. If you go way back, you have the clock, which is where it all began, and which began parsing time down. So the interesting thing is, we've made our lives more efficient than ever before. In the 1960s, there was this famous subcommittee hearing before Richard Nixon, where all these sociologists and experts and futurists predicted that by the 1980s, the average American would only be working 3 hours a week or something like that. And they said the main problem in life would be too much. And this is when people were envisioning the future as the Jetsons, right? The main problem they thought would be too much leisure. And yet leisure has plummeted. Since the 1970s, it's down 40-something%. and that's including entertainment. So the reality is we're more efficient than we've ever been as a human species, and labor-saving devices have saved us all this labor, but the reality is we've just spent all that time on other things. And so that shows that the root problem is deeper than just technology. There's like a human condition problem there where we could keep coming up with more technology and it's just going to make a bad problem worse because we don't know how to steward technology. It's the great problem with technologies. Things like a phone, like an iPhone and Wi-Fi access, take an extraordinary amount of self-awareness and self-control and self-mastery for them to be a tool and not a master. And most of us don't have anything close to the self-mastery that's required to have a phone and Wi-Fi access, basically. So this is like a human condition thing. So I think money, technology, consumerism, or the city for sure, but even definitely when you're outside of cities, I was just in Eastern Oregon camping the last couple of days, and it's like you just feel the whole pace has slowed down so much.
Unless you welcome the city to you in like internet or technology.
But that's the thing, is like even if you live on the island life and you're out and you don't have to commute to work, man, you just have 3 kids and a phone and there you have 100%. It. And especially if you have any middle class kind of life or up, man, it's a thing. So
it's
I
funny.
think those are some.
Yeah, and it's funny how you mentioned some of the, like, I'm huge on tracking like when things shift and pivoted, and a lot of those innovations and inventions are deeply fascinating. And I have a part in my next book there where almost a whole part of the chapter is on the light bulb and how that radically, again, transformed our ability for sleep, circadian rhythms, ability of always, and what I talk about there's a fine line between harnessing as image bearers, meaning like we're harnessing God's world for the better good of our vocation. And there's a fine line between that and cheating, right? Cheating sleep, cheating work, cheating our families with these harnessing abilities, right? And the light bulb crossed over very fast into letting us cheat sleep, cheat work, etc. And when you read the inventors of it, it's deeply fascinating as well, whether it's Edison and some other people obviously involved. It's like they hated sleep. That was actually their goal. Like his goal was like, wow. I think I can beat this. I think I can beat this. I don't ever want to sleep. It's a waste of time. So it's fascinating. It's really fascinating that like they refuse to let their humanness be an actual blessing and only a curse.
And you think about, I'm sure you did those research, because I did this, I came across that in my research as well. Like the average American in 1850 slept 11 hours a night.
It's insane.
And now we're down to 7 is the average. So that's a significant decrease.
Totally.
So you read like the old like biographies of Charles Spurgeon or whatever famous Christian you read, like they were up 4 a.m. praying, and it sounds incredible. And you're like, yeah, but they went to bed at 6:30. It was
totally exactly. Well, that's when I started thinking about it, is when we spent time
in 3 o'clock in Seattle.
Yeah, we spent true. We spent time in Uganda, and it's like you just go to bed when it's dark because like you
There's
can't
nothing
see.
else to do.
You literally can't see. You know what I mean? And so it's really interesting. And I heard of this before, but I just read it in a different way on the plane yesterday that I thought was a really cool image that this guy used. It was a brain scientist, neuroscientist, talking about the blue light, of course, and how that just kills our brains in regards to the false artificial light of phones and tech screens. And he kind of used this imagery of like, essentially when you look at the blue light, it leaves like, there's these molecular like amiodes or something like that, he said, where they get stuck on these parts of your brain. And he kind of said they're basically like brain plaque. Think of the same way with teeth and plaque on your teeth. And he goes, you can kind of shake them out throughout the day. You can kind of shake off the plaque. But if you're doing that right before you go to bed, like he's like, that's like eating a Snickers every single night before you go to bed as like the best thing for you before you go to sleep. And so I just got this picture of like brain plaque. Like if you look at it before you go to bed, you're literally just stacking this gross, filthy plaque on your brain. And like, that's just going to like kill you in the same way that a candy bar before bed would. So it's really interesting. What would you say? One question I have, because you got another one? Go ahead.
Well, no, I just wanted him to then follow up with what can we do?
Well, that's
can I?
So I'm going to ask a similar question because it's very similar. Okay. So we talk on this stuff a lot. I love that ruthless language from Willard. I feel like I'm going to start talking about that and using that. Like we almost feel weird because we literally just tell people like our mission in life is to, and you have to be ruthless in this age to actually make the most important things the most important things. And so we are weird where we schedule time, to turn off our phones, and we schedule time in our calendar that says do nothing, so that then when people ask, we say we have something on the calendar, but it says do nothing.
Yes.
And so all these different things. And so, but one question we get a lot from people is they do push back a little and say, well, like that's good for you, and like you can maybe do that because of X, Y, and Z with resources and privilege, which I totally understand and I'm very sensitive to. But also they'll say, but like I want to get there, but like my season of life like they kind of say like after this season of life I will. And so I'd love if you can talk to that, which is kind of like how can, so for example, the one I just got the other day was a college student, grad student, I think med student, so maybe middle of the 20s, insane work with, papers and research, etc. So they basically said like, I just can't get there. I can't do that right now with this level of like a job, rent, my medical, like there is sometimes, like here's what I'm asking. Is there sometimes seasons to kind of buck that a little bit? And if not, or if, or whatever, then yeah, what would be the remedy of like, how can, no matter what season you're in, busy or not busy, how ruthless can you be? And what are some tips to do that?
Yeah, well, I think those are kind of two connected but separate questions. I mean, I think I always want to know where that question is coming from. And honestly, most of the time when I get that question, it's a place of self-defense and don't impinge on my lifestyle, not a place of honest asking, with the exception of young parents people in your exact stage of life, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, little kids. I think that is probably the most difficult season of every season there is, way more than the grad school student, to like just even follow Jesus, you know what I mean? To have any time for prayer and
to be nice to people,
and Sabbath and sleeping 8 hours a night and being an emotionally healthy person. But clearly you guys are a great example of ways to do it without legalism, with plenty of freedom and based on your personality and all that kind of stuff. So if you can do it with 2 little kids and 1 on the way, then honestly, I think pretty much anybody can do it. So I think that I don't want to judge people's motivations. If people are asking because they just want to make an excuse, then it's kind of a waste of breath to have that conversation. If people are honestly asking, then I think I would say a couple of things. One, I would say, remember, we're not talking about sin as much as we're talking about wisdom. So, it's you and your own body and your own soul will reap the consequences. It's not like God's angry at you or whatever. I'm sure he would love to spend more time with you in his mind, with him in your mind. But we're not dealing with the sin issue per se. We're dealing with wisdom. And so, your body and your mind and your soul itself and your relationship with Jesus and with others will take a hit. And so you just have to, is grad school worth that? And the reality is, it doesn't mean don't go to grad school. It means you might have to do it differently. The second thing I would say is, what are your digital entertainment habits? The average American watches 5 hours of TV a day. The average millennial is on top of that on their phone 5.5 hours a day. That's average, middle of the bell curve. So when people tell me they don't have time, I honestly, very lovingly, most of the time say, yes, you do. You know what I mean? Because I don't know any grad school student or anybody, and I know like hardcore medical residency, like high achieving type A, and they all like have seen whatever recent, Amazon series on Jack Ryan way before. I don't have time to watch that kind of stuff,
Totally.
So I don't know I think the reality is we waste copious amounts of time on things like TV, Instagram, shopping, football, and again, I'm not saying any of those things are wrong, but I'm saying if those are getting your time and Jesus and soul and Sabbath and health isn't, then something is way out of whack in your priorities. I think that's the second thing I would say, is just throw your TV in the garbage till you graduate from grad school. Seriously. And delete your Instagram account and go get your doctorate or do whatever you need to do and have a Sabbath. And the third thing I would say is just augment based on your stage of life. So if you have a weird work schedule where you're in school and you work a part-time job, and so that means you don't work, 5-10-hour days or whatever, you have a weird schedule, whatever, then if you can't get a full Sabbath, then get what you can. If that means every Thursday from 4 to 10 o'clock at night, you're going to turn off your phone, you can rest, and then every Saturday morning you have until noon or whatever it is. Just do what you can. Keep to the spirit, the wisdom. The wisdom is unshakable. And so just get as close to that wisdom as you can in this season of life. If you have little kids, obviously for most people, if I was just a spiritual director, I would strongly recommend that every single disciple of Jesus starts their day with an hour of quiet, silent solitude, prayer, and scripture. I think, like, just as a general rule, regardless of your personality type, start your day with an hour with Jesus in the quiet before you ever turn on your phone, ever do anything. Well, a young parent that means you have to be up an hour before your kid. And if your kid's up at like 5:30, at some point it's the law of
Yep.
diminishing returns. You're just going to make yourself more angry and grouchy.
Totally.
You know what I
It's
mean?
true.
So there are
Yes.
seasons where you just have to augment it. And so
Yeah.
morning devotions might look like you wake up to your baby crying and you recite Psalm 23 in your mind before you get out of bed. And then you do something later, 4 hours later during nap time. You collapse on the couch and you read a psalm, and that's all you get that day. And a
Yep.
podcast while you're, taking care of the baby on your day off or whatever it is, So I think there's so much freedom and flexibility, but every young parent I know, the reason that they don't necessarily have long leisurely quiet time in the morning is not because they don't think it's important, because it's just not an option. And the
Yeah.
second it is an option, they want to get back to it because it's so life-giving,
Totally. Do you have anything you'd add to that, or a question you would ask? Or I'll give you 1 second, and then.
Well, she asked
Oh,
a
do you
good
got something?
question. I mean,
Yeah.
your question about how do we actually do it?
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
that's great. I just didn't know if you had more. Or
No, I just totally agree with that. I think especially in the newborn stage, like
Yeah.
a bunch of my mom friends and I are like, we just start crying at reading a Jesus storybook Bible because that's like
That's enough,
our
and you
one
need it,
time
yeah.
that we're like, oh, God loves us so much.
Yeah.
So I think it just looks totally different in the
yeah.
young kid stage.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and then we'll
Yes.
finish
Wait,
up.
he still needs to answer the question.
Oh, I thought he did. I thought he said
No.
augment. You said like what?
No,
would you
I mean,
do about
Alyssa's question was like, what are
Yeah.
some practical things to do?
it? Okay,
And
keep going then. Keep
slow your
going.
life down.
Keep
And that-
going.
Okay, honestly, we could have 3 or 4 hours of conversation around that. And so let me just put on the kind of pastor hat or Jesus follower hat. I think that right now, in a cultural moment where all the elites are talking about this and more, it hasn't hit the mainstream yet, but you have, Ariana Huffington who's getting rid of her cell phone, and you have
Yeah.
like elites are all diagnosing the problem and dealing with it, which is always a good harbinger of where the rest of society may or may not get to. So it's out there, and I honestly think that the way of Jesus has more to say to this is an incredible moment for us because we have 2 millennia of tradition around like copying the lifestyle of Jesus, and all of these disciplines or practices designed for spiritual life, emotional health, life in community, life of high intensity and purpose and meaning and simplicity around what really matters, not getting sucked into just entertainment fodder or whatever, or endless web clicks or something,
Yeah.
So I think that the Jesus tradition has so much to offer on this subject. And so I think a couple of the key like spiritual disciplines or practices from Jesus that are over the top important right now. If our culture is all about go, 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 do, buy, sell, experience, have, FOMO, then I think right now some of the most important spiritual disciplines are all about stopping and about slowing. So they would be Sabbath would be at the top of my list. Silence and solitude would probably be a close second. Simplicity, which is even making a comeback in secularism with the title of minimalism, is one of, because again, money is one of, and shopping and consumerism and busyness and too much stuff in your garage and too many things to take care of and cleaning your house. This is all a big part of the hurry conversation. So the simplicity conversation, which is like minimalism, but with the best stuff, with Jesus, is a conversation I hope the church comes back to and doesn't just relegate that to like monks in the past, but like recaptures simplicity as a core practice from the way of Jesus, a core spiritual discipline for our life with Jesus and apprenticeship to him. And then, you have John Ortberg and Richard Foster and others who full on like talk about the spiritual discipline of slowing, almost as if it's like a new spiritual discipline. It's not actually new. It just never needed to be said. In 300 AD, you didn't have to tell people to slow down. Like the fastest you could ever go was on your mule or something, So like
2 miles away.
That wasn't a problem. Yes. And so like the spiritual discipline of slowing, like, so I have like all this list in my next book. I have like 30 things, like just practical ideas from everything from what you're saying, turning my phone off at 8:30 every night, not turning it back on until the same time the next morning, to, like literally getting in the longest line at the checkout stand and not pulling out my phone. Like all of these little like gamification, kind of like little games I play to try to slow down my mind and slow down my body. Everything as serious as Christian mindfulness to as goofy as getting in the slow lane when I'm driving somewhere, to just try to slow myself down to the speed and the pace of Jesus, so that I can experience the love and the joy and the peace that he has for me, and that the people that I come in contact with don't experience a hurried, stressed out, too busy for them, unhappy, grouchy me, but rather experience my best self.
Totally.
That's so good.
You got more?
I was just gonna add, I feel like the Lord's really been teaching me this lately in the last month, even of just feeling, and not so much the hurry, but just being on my phone a lot and feeling a lot of anxiety. And
Yes.
and then when I've started to put boundaries around it, I feel so much more peace and the slowing down. But it really takes so much work to do it. I think just because
Yes.
I'm forming new habits. But it's so interesting that you talk about that, because then this last week, as I've been reading through John, I feel like over and over the Lord is saying, this is for your joy. This is for your peace. And so I
Yes.
love how you've combined both of those together, because I feel like they go hand in hand. And as we slow down, we get to see how much joy and peace the Lord has for us. And so it's like, how do we step into that? How do we live into that? What things do we need to put off? That does take work, like not getting your phone out in the Costco line.
Yeah.
I have to mentally be like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But just, it's so good. And I love just how the joy and peace go hand in hand with that.
Totally. So we're going to let you go here, but I'll just end with one final thought, and I'd love to hear what you want to push people to, in the sense of what you feel like book would most encourage them in this space, which one, how they can listen to you, how they can get follow you. But I think, one thought I said last week, we actually had an interview with Myquillyn Smith, who she kind of writes and talks about home and decor, but from a minimalist perspective, about pushing back against consumerism and also pushing back against the stuffiness and noisiness. And one thing I said there that I've actually processed more is this idea of, I think our culture and then Jesus followers should have opposite definitions of wastefulness. Like in our culture, the definition of wasting your life is usually not doing stuff that awesome. Like an ordinary life in culture is wasting your life. That you're wasting it.
Because you weren't famous or influential.
Exactly. And ordinariness, I actually have talked about this lately too. I think ordinariness is actually the millennial curse. Like we think that is the peak center of where I do not want to go in life. If I'm ordinary, then I've wasted my life. And I just think there's a level, depends on how you define it, but I think there's a level of ordinariness, mundaneness, slowness that all kind of wrap together as actually a virtue of following Jesus. And back to the wastefulness thing, I think it's really interesting. So they say that's wastefulness, but I think when you actually look at take garbage, for example, like when you go to New York City, the wastefulness that piles up on the curbs, human waste, is because of usually activity. And the more activity there is inside that house, the more waste they're going to produce outside the house, right? Like the bigger the party, the bigger the thing, the more people in there, and the more they're usually hurrying and not being mindful of how to actually steward the earth, then they're going to produce more waste. And I think that's a perfect metaphor for our lives, that the more input we have and the more active we are, the more that's actually true wastefulness. Like you're actually wasting your life, the more hurried you are, because it produces more waste.
Have you guys seen Won't You Be My Neighbor? The
Dude,
documentary
I cried.
on Mr.
I saw it in the
Rogers.
theaters. I saw it the day it came. I'm obsessed. I got 3 biographies on him. I saw it the day it came out in theaters. So all that say, yes, incredible. I love how he got angry in that one little moment too.
Man, I loved it. And it was just, it blew up in Portland, is playing all the really cool indie theaters. And I just thought, man, this is a Presbyterian pastor who all these indie Portlander secular kids are listening to. It's pretty special. Anyway, I love at the end where they take an honest look at did Mr. Rogers ruin the millennial generation by telling us that you're special? That was his thing, special. And, did he create this entitlement kind of, hyper individualistic, radical autonomy, which is honestly one of the biggest problems we're facing as a society right now. And they asked him, because he got flack for it, going back quite a while, what do you mean when you say you are special? And he was so gracious. He said, what I meant to convey with that was you, and I might get the quote a little bit wrong. Maybe you remember it better than I, Jeff. You remember this part where he goes, what I meant to convey
incredible.
Was you don't have to do anything spectacular to be loved.
Exactly. And I loved when he said the word spectacular. That was the word he used, because it's we think we have to be. That is actually the antidote to this culture more than, that is what millennials need to hear more than anything.
Yes. And it was so proud. He wasn't saying go out and become the coolest, sexiest thing who does this amazing thing that's all over the internet. Yeah. He was saying, no, just you, ordinary you.
Yes.
You don't have to go out and achieve something to be loved. You are loved. And
totally.
I think that captured it really well.
No, that was profound. That was, if you guys, that's a good thing to end on. If you guys have not seen the documentary, it probably will be out soon on Netflix, etc. Won't You Be My Neighbor? Maybe it already is. You can rent it. But it is an incredible look at Mr. Rogers' life. And even that part, I think in the movie documentary where they talked about silence and his profound use of silence in television, and how,
and
again,
slowing. I mean, he
exactly.
was a masterful
Slow.
example of an unhurried, loving, joyful, peaceful presence. I mean, to a T.
Totally. And it's interesting too how, like, again, back to that wastefulness thing, people told him you're wasting television time by being silent for 10 seconds. Like, that's wasting the energy of TV. And that to him was actually the opposite. And we obviously know that the impact wasn't wasteful. 10 seconds of TV silence is deeply profound. So, hey, thanks so much for being on today, man. Tell us real quick, tell everyone who's listening. I know a lot of people already follow you that follow us, and they've wanted you to be on the podcast, and so I know that. But tell them other people where they can find you, some books you've written, and other ways they can kind of get engaged with your stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's pretty easy. JohnMarkComer.com, COMER, Instagram and Twitter, same thing, my name. And I've written a couple of books. They're all easy to find. God Has a Name is the most recent one. The next upcoming one's going to be, God willing, on Hurry. It's in the hopper. We're finishing up the editing right now. And that's it. Or come say hi to us in Portland, Oregon, where we have not so great weather half the year, but the best coffee around.
And food.
And food.
And ice cream.
And
people.
And pretty much anything, because there's nothing to do out. We're stuck inside half the
Exactly.
year. So
Exactly.
just come up with really good coffee, beer, and food.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks a ton for coming on, man. We really appreciate you.
We love you guys so much. Thanks for having me.